Good afternoon, bandits. I'm going to tell you right now, if you do not like math, you will probably not like being a production manager or a production coordinator. Today we're going to be talking about one of those kind of boring things that is nonetheless important. And it sounds simple until someone actually asks you to explain it, which is how crew rates work and what it actually means to calculate crew hourly rates correctly. Because here's a very common thing in the industry. Someone might come up to you and they'll be like, oh yeah, the DP, they're on board for $1,500 per day. But the second that you have to apply this to either payroll software or calculate it by hand on a time card, or even worse, calculate crew overtime using these numbers, something like this doesn't mean anything on its own. There's some math behind it, and a lot of that math really matters when you start getting into the nuts and bolts of how film production and crew rates work. We're going to get into all of that, and I'm going to show you guys on this calculator how it all works. You will also have access to that in a link in the description below, and let's knock this bad boy out. So when you hear someone's rate described as, say $750 per day, it actually is more likely to be described as something like $750 for 12 or $750 for 10. And what those numbers 10 and 12 mean is that those are day rate guarantees. So what that means is that that crew member is guaranteed to earn this amount of money for 10 hours or for 12 hours of work, regardless of whether the day actually runs that long. So for a 10-hour day, they would work 8 hours and get paid $750. They would work 3 hours and still get paid $750. If they work 11 hours, they get paid $750 and then 1 hour of overtime. So the question becomes, all right, if they're working for 10 hours at $750 for the 10 hours, why wouldn't you just divide $750 by 10? The reason that you cannot divide $750 by 10 in order to get $75 per hour is because of how California labor laws break down. In the state of California, any hours worked beyond hour number 8 in a single day are considered overtime, and overtime has to be paid at a premium rate. So a 10-hour day actually isn't 10 hours of straight time, and a 12-hour day is not 12 hours of straight time. They are a blend of both straight time and overtime. Now, I know you may be thinking, well, payroll software does this automatically. And yes, it does. But when I started doing this, I was doing time cards by hand. And there were still a lot of situations where you need to be able to understand this math. You might have adjustments mid-job. You might be calculating meal penalties. You might be running overtime scenarios. And knowing how it works keeps you from being in a position where you need to make granular calculations, but don't have the software at hand to do it for you. So we're going to go right in here into this math explainer screen, and I'm going to show you how this breakdown works. We're going to go into our day rate input, and we will put $750 in here and see all of this start to calculate out. So let's talk about the math right here. From a given day rate, you need to determine what your baseline hourly rate is. So as I said, we didn't take $750 and divide it by 10. We are actually dividing it by 11. For a 10-hour guarantee, you need to divide by 11. And for a 12-hour guarantee, you need to divide by 14. Now, the question is, why do we use these two divisors and how do we reach them? So the reason that we have these things split out, as I mentioned before, the first 8 hours of the day are at your baseline straight time. It is a multiplier of 1x. But the last few hours of your guaranteed day rate, in this case for a 10-hour day, hours 9 and 10, they are calculated at 1.5x. So when you back calculate the hourly rate, you have to account for the fact that some of these hours, these last 2 hours of the day, are technically worth more. So if you just divide by 10 or 12, your implied hourly rate is actually higher than it needs to be, and your overtime math doesn't hold up. So you can see if you divide by 10, 10 hours actually gives you $825. So you are paying them $75 more than what you agreed to versus when you put in 11. So here's how this math actually breaks down. As I said before, you have hours 1 through 8 at straight time. So this is straight time at 8 hours. Then you have the next 2 hours right here at 1.5x. So the way that we actually get 11 is you want to take 1 times 8, which is 8 hours of straight time. Then you want to take 1.5 times 2. And if you get 1.5 times 2, you get 3. So what this means is that 2 hours of time and a half is effectively the same as 3 hours of straight times. So if we take 3 effective straight time hours and add it to our baseline 8 straight time hours, we get 8 plus 3, which equals 11, and that becomes our divisor. That same exact thing applies over here to a 12-hour day. We take 8 times 1, and then we're going to take 4 times 1.5, which equals 6. So we take 6 effective hours at straight time plus 8 hours of our original straight time, and that gives us 14. And then we take that 14 and we divide our day rate by it to give us our base hourly rate. So that is the math behind those calculations as to why the 10-hour guarantee is divided by 11 and why the 12-hour guarantee is divided by 14. Now, for example, if you want to check out how this math clocks, we can see that right here. For our 8 hours of straight time, we get $545.45. It's just the base hourly rate times the multiplier times 8 equals that. Same thing down here. We're going to take the base hourly rate times a 1.5 multiplier times 2 hours. And then if we take both of these and put them together, we get $750 for a 10-hour day. So these sections right here encompass your daily guarantee. So if you work 12 hours or less, you'll make $750. You work 10 hours or less, you'll make $750. But let's say, what happens if you go to hour 11? If the day runs past 10 hours, hours 11 and 12 are still worth time and a half, but they aren't guaranteed the way they are in a 12-hour day. So in a 12-hour day, hours 9 through 12 are already factored in. But in a 10-hour day, they aren't factored in. So when you come down here, it's the same calculation that we had above here. It's just going to be 1.5 times whatever number of hours you worked over 10, and that's going to give you your value. So for any hours that go over 10, you are effectively being paid at a rate of 68.18 times 1.5, which is $102.27 per hour. Now, say, for example, you go over 12 hours and you hit double time. Double time, again, sounds exactly like time and a half. You're just going to take your base hourly rate, multiply it by 2, and you're going to get a hourly overtime rate of $136.36. The same thing applies to the 12-hour day. The only difference is you don't get the 1.5x overtime because it is already factored into your rate. So you won't start getting overtime until you go past the 12-hour mark. But you will notice that when you're on a 12-hour guarantee, your effective base hourly rate is lower than on a 10-hour day. So it's not uncommon for starting positions like PAs to be on a 12-hour day, whereas more union experience crew will be on a 10-hour day. But if there's anything you walk away from this with, just remember, 10-hour guarantee, divide by 11, 12-hour guarantee, divide by 14. So now that you got the formula and you can get your base hourly rate, everything else will build off of that. If you're using a payroll software like Wrapbook, you don't need to be as versed in this simply because you can set the day rate guarantees and it will automatically calculate the base hourly rate for you. But when it comes to calculating things like meal penalties or crew overtime in your budget, that's going to be a different story. You still want to know how to manually do this type of thing. So let me show you what that looks like in practice. So we're going to go over here to our OT calculator tab. And this is going to help us calculate overtime, meal penalties, just a number of different scenarios where we may need to know exactly how much extra money we're going to need to pay if we're either violating meal penalties or if we're putting crew into overtime. Now, a quick note, payroll softwares like Hot Budget or Showbiz Budgeting do have overtime calculators like this built in to a certain extent. For this video, I am first off being budget agnostic. One reason, because you can actually copy the data from those fairly easily into this. But the other reason that I built a separate overtime calculator is that OT scenarios can get pretty nuanced pretty fast. And when you're calculating OT inside of a full budget, it's being calculated within the context of everything else in the budget. So if you actually need to isolate just the overtime math and see it clearly, you may end up doing a lot of extra work to pull that out of the budget. This allows me to kind of put all of my current calculations into one place, and then I can adjust all the variables I need to get as accurate a number as possible without having to dig through the budget in order to find it. So let's just talk about a couple positions here. Let's say we've got an assistant director on for $1,000 for the day. And let's say we've got a director of photography on for $1,500 for the day. And we're just going to say that this is a real small shoot. They're the only two here, but they're going to go into overtime. All right. And let's say our director of photography is actually on a 10-hour day. So we'll put 11 right there. And as you can see, my hourly column right here is calculating exactly what we need. So let's say that our day is going to go 13 hours. Well, we know our assistant director is on a 12-hour day, so he's cleared up to hour 12, but we need to give him one more hour to get him up to 13. We know that our director of photography is good for 10 hours, so we need 3 extra hours to get him up to the 13 hours. So since the director of photography is on a 10-hour day, first we need to get the remaining 2 hours of time and a half to get him up to 12 hours. And then we need to get one more hour to bring him up to 13 hours. And so now you'll see that the individual overtime columns are getting calculated for each person. So our assistant director is going to make an additional $142, and our director of photography is going to make an additional $681. So now that we know what our overtime is for this, there are a few other calculations that we usually need to factor in. One of them is overtime plus fringes. And then we'll need to calculate the markup as well. So just so you guys are aware, fringes are basically a fee that is tacked on top of your payroll. So whenever you run crew through payroll, the company needs to pay what are called either P&W or fringe costs that are basically additional taxes that get tacked on in order to employ employees. So in general, fringes on non-union jobs are about 25%. So whatever you pay somebody when going through payroll on a job, you need to factor in about an additional 25% more in order to put them through payroll. So fundamentally, even though it's $681 in overtime for the DP, once we add 25%, that is going to be $852.27. Now, the additional thing that we want to factor in right here in terms of telling our producer how much it's going to cost us, we want to tell him, all right, the overtime plus the fringes is going to be $1,000.30, which is just the sum of this column right here. But then we also need to tack on the markup fee. And the markup fee is the percentage that the production company charges as a service for putting these people through their company. So there's a whole lot of layers that go on to this. But anytime a production company executes a job, the client needs to pay them not only for the cost of the services, but the markup fee. That is basically how a production company makes money, because the production company has the connections, they have the insurance, they have the infrastructure that allows these productions to happen. And that's where they collect their fees, is through the markup. So they're going to get charged an additional $1,030.84 for all the crew overtime and fringes. And then the company will make, in this case, an additional 15% on that amount, which yields a total of $1,185.47. A quick side note while we were here, there are these things called MPs. MPs are short for meal penalties. And what they are is anytime there is a meal penalty violation, which means if you don't break a crew member for a meal every 6 hours, you incur what is called a meal penalty. On a non-union job, a meal penalty is equal to 1 hour of straight time. So if an assistant director gets a meal penalty on a non-union job, this guy at $1,000 for 12 gets a $71.43 meal penalty. Our DP at $1,500 on a 10-hour day gets a $136 meal penalty. On a non-union job, they only get 1 meal penalty per day. But if you're on a union job, the meal penalties are a little bit different. They're slightly more forgiving, but they do stack. So if you go a really long time without feeding your crew, you're going to have really, really expensive meal penalties. I only mention this because meal penalties are a concern that pop up on jobs, but they're very simple to calculate once you understand the payroll math. A couple edge cases and things that I want to point out. If you're paying someone as a contractor, the day rate can actually be just a day rate with no overtime or hourly math. You can give them a rate of $500 for the day if they are a contractor. In California, most crew are classified as employees through payroll, which is exactly why this kind of thing matters. It's very rare that you'll be able to pay somebody as a contractor with just a day rate. Even then, it's so ubiquitous within the industry that even folks that go on invoice will charge overtime if they are, beyond their hourly clock of say 10 or 12 hours. It's very rare that you'll run into somebody who will accept a day rate. It will have to be tied to some kind of hourly guarantee. Secondly, I've mentioned that a lot of this is in California, but even when I'm shooting jobs outside of California, I tend to calculate payroll this way. I adhere to the rule that after 8 hours, they make time and a half. There are some states that have more of an aggregate model where you won't hit overtime until you break 40 hours in a given week versus 8 hours in a given day. So you could theoretically work 12-hour days for 3 days and never hit overtime. However, this style is pretty common within the film industry. It's the one I adhere to pretty much anywhere I shoot. There are some payroll nuances in places like New York that have some rules that are distinct from California. But as a general rule of thumb, this is likely the format that you're going to find. The first 8 hours are at straight time. The second 4 hours are going to be at time and a half. And anything after 12 hours is going to be at double time. And third, as I mentioned, software like Wrapbook can handle all of this automatically when you input the day rate and the type of guarantee they have. But understanding this math means that you know how to catch errors, you can answer crew questions, and you can do quick back of envelope checks when you need to. You do not want to be a production manager who just hopes the software got it right and also doesn't understand the mechanics of how that software is doing its job. That's it. I know it's a lot of math. Thanks for bearing with me. The calculator is going to be linked in the description below. Make yourself a copy, fill it in, use it as you need to. And if any of you bandits are new to the industry and are looking to expand your network and find techniques to secure more work, I wrote a book about just that. It's called The Back Office Bandit. It is the lessons that I wish I had when I was starting out. The link for it is in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you on the next one.